So this is Digital Music Trends, episode 102, recorded on the 19th of September 2012. Hello everyone, and welcome to Digital Music Trends. I hope you've enjoyed the first episode of the new format last week, and we're back here this week with some more great guests. So let's start with some introductions. First, we have Steve Knopper from Denver, Colorado, author of Appetite for Self-Destruction, the Spectacular Crash of the Record Industry in the Digital Age, as well as a regular contributor to Rolling Stone magazine and other publications. So hi Steve, and great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. This should be fun.
Cool. So, and then we have Duncan Geere. He's now a freelance journalist, but previously he was news editor at Wired UK, and he moved to Gothenburg to study a master's degree in environmental science. So that's awesome. And you also just been covering the launch of a new European meteorological satellite, which looked pretty exciting. So how's things going?
Yeah, things are good. I was in the European Space Agency this time a couple of days ago, which was tremendously exciting. They have stars all over their conference room floor.
Amazing. So cool. And finally, a fellow Londoner, Andy Malt, editor of CMU, which is a fantastic website and a resource on music news, as well as music industry news. So hi, Andy. Thanks for joining us. And how's things?
Hello. Good to be here.
Great. Awesome. And if you haven't signed up to the CMU daily newsletter, you really should. You can head to the cmuwebsite.com/daily and sign up from there. And it's a daily newsletter. It's really a great read that you should have in your inbox. Okay, so let's start with the stories of this week. There's a lot to talk about. As usual, too many stories to talk about at once. We're probably going to cover Music Metric and their report on piracy, the reactions in the media, the new iTunes and iPods, France and the first Hadopi conviction, Shazam, maybe touch on the Amanda Palmer controversy if you guys are familiar with that, and talk about some new features on Reverbnation and the Topspin. But I thought I'd start out with the piracy just to get the tough things out of the way first, because, you know, kind of have to talk about it. And there was a report issued by Music Metrics, which is a London-based company that works on basically measuring statistics and usage of music across multiple platforms. And in this specific case, particularly looking at Bittorrent activity in the UK. They released a digital music index, which basically is a report on the situation of music piracy in the UK and worldwide that they did by monitoring the activity over the past year on Bittorrent, and it offers some interesting insights on what's going on this front, on the home front in the UK, but also worldwide, looking at what are the countries that are pirating the most and this kind of thing. I mean, the most interesting thing about this whole report and what happened is that it really got picked up everywhere. There were reports about it in pretty much all over the shop, from North America, US, North America, Europe, Asia, pretty much everywhere. So the first thing I want to talk about is, like, do you guys think there's still a huge amount of interest in the topic of piracy, and it makes headlines fundamentally? Duncan, what do you think?
I think, yeah, there is definitely still an enormous amount of interest in it. I think it's becoming less and less relevant to the industry. The industry seems to have kind of mostly moved beyond that topic. Certainly at conferences these days, which I go to, panels about piracy are becoming fewer and fewer because there's nothing really new to say on the topic. Whereas in the mainstream media, people are kind of still interested in it. Most people, as the report says, do indulge in some sort of piracy. So I think people are interested in reading about it, and so people are interested in publishing about it. Yeah.
And Andy, on the UK front, what was your take on the report?
Well, I think it was interesting. It's always, interesting to have a few figures about. I think the geographical information was kind of interesting, and there was a little tool to be able to look up what was being most shared near you. So Pitbull is apparently most popular on BitTorrent near our office.
Yeah,
that's what the kids of Hoxton are listening to.
Yeah.
But I mean, like Duncan says, it's a topic that the industry has really moved on from. And possibly the only really interesting thing about it was that there weren't more things being shared over BitTorrent. There was a stat that it's kind of, what was it, like 33 million albums shared over BitTorrent and 14.8 sold legitimately, which is like, you would have thought actually
would be more
would be shared than that. Obviously, BitTorrent isn't all file sharing, but it's still kind of maybe the headline is that file sharing isn't as popular as we thought.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the problem with the report was that there aren't really terms of comparison because it's the first time they do it. So Robert Andrews on Paid Content actually wrote an article pointing out that there's a good chance that if we had been able to see a report from comparable report from last year and the year before, then that would have shown that piracy is actually declining. And Steve, what's your take on the US front on what's happening and whether streaming services are actually starting to offset the piracy phenomenon?
Yeah, no, I don't have too much to add on this, and I don't think there have been comparable numbers that have come out in the U.S. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, I mean, piracy remains a big problem. But I agree with Duncan's point that it's, as far as the way the record industry proceeds, that's kind of baked in and has been for the last 4 or 5 years. So, you know, I think that there's just sort of an assumption on the part of labels, specifically, that yeah, you know, there's 33 million people in the first half in the UK who are doing this stuff. So therefore, we're going to have to not be so reliant on selling old-fashioned CDs like we used to. And that's, you know, this is not news, but that's a different thing than the labels were saying even 4 or 5 years ago, which they were, you know, pounding their fists on the table and saying, you know, DRM and throw people in jail and sue everybody, you know, and they're still doing that to some extent, but I sort of get the sense that with Spotify and giving away music for free and different things that allow people to sort of get the music for free anyway, and let's get different revenue streams, that sort of seems to be the direction that they're going in. You know, is it successful? Are streaming services such as Spotify and RDO and MOG and all the others, are they kind of making up for the revenue of lost CD sales? You know, I'm seeing optimistic reports that show that for the first time, really, you know, that it's starting to point in that direction. But I don't have any sense that streaming services are the magic pill that's going to save the record industry or certainly return them to their CD selling heights in the 80s or the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I agree totally. I mean, this subject is completely kind of, you know, dead from my point of view. The problem is that, I mean, the only interesting side of it is the policy side at this point left, because we all know about the numbers, we know what's going on, and we know that it's probably starting to be offset by Spotify and other legal services, but the way that governments react to the problem and the way the industry is lobbying the governments to react, that's probably the only interesting point left on the debate, because we know that in the UK there's still a lot of stuff being discussed on what's going to happen on that front. I know in Sweden there's actually been steps taken towards trying to eradicate the problem of piracy, and in the US they're just leaving everything to the policymakers. So it's kind of, it's an open question at this point.
I think what's kind of interesting here is that obviously it's never going to be eradicated completely, but right now with music, and this is the big difference between music and other industries like books and film and so on, is that with music it's actually it's kind of a pain to download an album off BitTorrent, whereas it's really simple to just load up Spotify and play it there. And that's the real point at which piracy goes away, when it becomes easier to do it legally than it is to pirate it.
Yeah.
And also there's a question that I've been thinking about a lot, which is not a new question, but sort of rental versus ownership. You know, my whole life, I'm 43 and I'm a record collector, you know, and my whole life I've been that sort of personality. Just recently with Spotify and some of these other services, I've been thinking to myself, do I need to own anything? You know, what's the point? Why should I even own this? Why do I even have to have a hard drive full of songs? And I think, go ahead, sorry, Duncan.
I was going to say, I think it comes down to trust more than anything. You have to trust that the labels and that the streaming services will be able to keep enough content up there that will replace your library sufficiently from now ever after. Yeah. It's really all about trust at the end of the day.
Sure, but there's also trust about, will my hard drive fail?
Yeah, that's true.
Am I going to lose all my music? And you know, and there's also sort of, it used to be, I mean, I'm digressing, but it used to be that the only way that you could get the music was to actually own the CDs, and if you had a large CD collection, you had access. But now, having a large CD collection, it's just starting to feel like hoarding. It's just like, you know, why do I have all this stuff in my house? I don't, you know. So I'm really rethinking this ownership model, and I assume that if I'm doing that, there are many other people who are doing it too. I mean, maybe that's that the industry has to get over. I don't know. It's just a thought.
I had exactly that debate in my head a month ago when I moved from the UK to Sweden, and I sold all my CDs, and I don't miss them.
Yeah.
Good. It's good to know.
Yeah, I think no, there is an issue, but I mean, in terms of like, we're obviously all early adopters in that sense, and using streaming services and moving on. But even like people, people are still moving on to like iTunes and the kind of not physical downloads, but like owning something, having it on a hard drive, and that's still kind of taking off. Like in terms of certainly in the UK, CDs are still selling pretty well, and it's kind of how long it takes for that kind of to move everyone over to the kind of access rather than ownership model. I think there was a lot of particularly, I know we're going to talk about iTunes later, but there was kind of a lot of things written about how iTunes was irrelevant now because everyone's on streaming services. But streaming services are still really, really niche.
Yeah,
probably always will be, because actually most people don't want access to all the music in the world. They only, like most people buy like 2 CDs a year, and that's they're happy with that music and kind of listening to everything else on the radio. So. I think that one of the difficulties for the industry now is kind of converting those people to the new models, where might not actually want what's on offer at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and there's new things coming up every day. Andy, are you excited about Amazon Cloud Services launching in the UK? Do you think anybody's going to use it?
I am not excited about it. I don't know.
That was a trick question.
I was thinking, I don't really want a hard drive full of MP3s anymore, because they're making my computer runs quite slowly, and I don't really want a hard drive full of MP3s in someone else's office either.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to make. Okay, I just wanted to talk really briefly about the Hadopi law and what's going on in France. So that's kind of one of the first examples that we have of a 3 strikes law being actually enforced and leading to a fine. But it's kind of funny, because really the fine is 150 euros, and it was for the download of 2 Rihanna songs. And I gotta think that surely there's people that have done this 3 times in a row that are probably downloading hundreds of songs rather than just 2. Do you guys think this is gonna act as a real deterrent, or is it just kind of a laughable fine at this point?
Well, this is the guy that didn't actually do it, isn't it?
Well, that's what he claims.
His wife, he willed his wife into court, or an ex-wife, and she admitted that she downloaded the songs instead. Exactly. Which I think kind of makes a bit of a farce of the whole thing, really. You're prosecuting somebody for something that they didn't do just because he owned the broadband connection. Yeah, but the number 2 songs, it just seems like such a low number to actually go through with the whole process. I would have thought that the people that actually would come through to the end of the 3 strikes would be like people that really pirate on a fairly large scale, or so it kind of shows that it's not exactly targeting the right people at this point. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know what so far that 150 euros has cost the French taxpayer. Yeah, they sent out, I think, 1 point something million first notices, which is an incredible high amount of letters to send out. How does that? What is the population of France? I don't actually know. It's gonna be like 40 or 50 million, something like that. Surely. Okay. Yeah. So, crazy. So yeah, nothing really to comment on this. It just feels like they're targeting the wrong people in the sense that people that are really downloading hundreds of songs or thousands of songs are moving on to VPNs and hiding their online identity so that they can't actually be tracked down. So I don't know how something like this in the UK would impact anything that's people are doing. Well, I mean, sorry. I was going to say I've always held that that this file sharing legislation stuff has about as much effect on piracy as piracy tends to do on the music industry anyway. Yeah, which is almost nothing. Andy,
I was just say sorry. I agree with that. I think that, I mean, it's a little bit comparable to when the RIAA here in America started suing people whenever that was, 2003, 2004. And the issue that, obviously this is kind of an extension of that, but a different thing. But the issue is sort of, was that a deterrent for piracy? And I don't, I'm not sure in retrospect the answer to that question. I'm not sure it's definitive. But I do think that the RIAA's focus at that time was educational. And I do think there was a bit of a line. Before that, they're legitimate. It sounds weird for us, who were following all this stuff. But there was, before those lawsuits, legitimately people who went, oh, if I download LimeWire and say okay, and they tell me it's legal if I click the things on LimeWire, then it's okay for me to do this. But after those lawsuits, I think there were very few people who were that legitimately confused.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, perhaps, and I'm no supporter of the RIAA, in terms of the way they've done their lawsuit platforms, their lawsuit strategy. But I do think that educational thing back then was necessary. I'm not sure it's really necessary anymore. I think most people get it.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of, certainly like the Digital Economy Act over here, in terms of the record companies lobbying for that to be passed, I think there's an element of, you can say, if companies are going to own intellectual property, then they have a right and almost an obligation to kind of say, that's ours and you can't have it. But at the same time, I think Duncan's earlier point that actually it's more of a carrot than a stick situation of like creating services like Spotify that are just better than file sharing is a much better way to convert people to legitimate services than kind of waving a finger at them.
Yeah. All right,
I think what's key as well is that you can't really blame the technology. Technology just makes things that people are doing anyway more efficient. And this is behavior, piracy is behavior that people have been doing forever. People love sharing things. That's what people do. And technology makes it more efficient in a way that suddenly it becomes more of a problem, or more of a perceived problem because it's more of a noticeable problem. But this is something that people have been doing, ever since recorded music was invented, before recorded music was invented.
Yeah. Yeah, and Duncan, just moving on to to a quick diversion on something that I didn't put in the lineup. That's quite interesting for you, I think, on the environment side. The Music Tank report that showed the impact of environmental impact of cloud computing and cloud storage, specifically in a music industry sense, but kind of I guess it applies to any kind of cloud service that we may use, and the fact that it may actually be more environmentally unfriendly to stream a CD hundreds of times rather than actually buying the physical copy. You've got a background in environmental studies. What's your take on that?
Well, I had a kind of brief look through the report. I should say that I haven't looked at this properly in depth yet, and I do mean to, because I am very, very interested in this topic. But it's as far as I can see, they've made some slightly interesting assumptions in there, stuff that might not necessarily apply. I mean, they've talked about, I can't remember what the exact figure it was, but something like if you stream a song 67 times or a number like that, then it's the equivalent of then it starts emitting more carbon or carbon equivalent gases into the atmosphere than making that CD would. Yeah. But what I'm interested in kind of knowing, for example, is then do they take into account playing back that CD? Do they take into account the power that, say, an amplifier uses that when it's pumping those tunes out? There's an awful lot of stuff in there that is non-negligible, but that they don't seem to have taken into account. So yeah. I'd put big question marks over that report for the time being. Yeah, me too. I mean, and the other assumption that made the headlines is that because broadband speeds are going to get so much higher, people are just going to stream lossless music. Yeah, uncompressed WAV files, which I don't think it's going to happen. True. No, exactly. No. Andy, did you manage to get a look at that? Doubtful.
Yeah, I mean, also, I don't think it really took into account caching either. Like, it kind of assumed that every time you play a track, it's re-downloading it, which isn't necessarily the case. Yeah. Spotify will store a cache of whatever it is, like 10% of your hard drive. Yeah. So there are certainly, like Duncan said, I haven't properly read the whole report yet. But,
sure. Sure, absolutely.
I think what's key to remember here is that it's one technology among any. There are far bigger threats to the environment than Spotify.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I mean, it's kind of funny that a report like that comes out from a music angle, because surely there's much bigger threats to the environment if we're talking about data consumption when you talk about videos or YouTube or Netflix. All kind of video streaming services that for one movie you probably stream as much data as for a month or 2 months of use of Spotify. So it's kind of an interesting angle that it's taken, but I guess it's worth thinking about.
It's definitely worth thinking about. I completely agree. I mean, it's good that the research has been done. You know, it's always good that more research is being done, but I don't think we should all stop using streaming services as a result.
Yeah.
And I think Music Tank have said it's a starting off point. It's a discussion point. So we shouldn't all write it off.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a great thing to think about, just in terms of the fact that people are just taking the cloud for granted. They don't even think about where the data is coming from. Most people don't even think about the data centers, really. They just think it's somewhere. It's in the internet. So
in the cloud.
Which is why, like, when there's a fire or something physical happens to a data center and people lose data, they go completely berserk, because they think, what? You actually lost the physical data that is on the cloud? What's going on? Okay, so talking about cloud and sort of identification and really bad segue, I was wanting to talk about Shazam as well. Shazam is a really interesting company. They've reached 250 million users announced this week, and while they build their business on music, they're really setting their sights on movies as well in order to expand the business. So what's your take on Shazam? Do you think it's gone as far as it can on the music front? And what's your take on the move and the expansion of the move in the movie business?
Sure, I did a story on that this week, as you know, and I think that I think the company is sort of acknowledging, maybe without actually coming out and saying it this way, but I think that they're basically acknowledging, yeah, we've gone about as far business-wise as we can with the music discovery model. They're not giving up on it, but I think they've hit 250 million users, and frankly, that's a lot of people for it's a great app. I love that app, but it is kind of a gimmick, right? It's not like I have to use Shazam in order to be able to listen to my music. No, it's just you happen to be in a bar and you hear some cool song, and what is that song? So, but I think what they're doing is a very smart strategic inflection point. They're taking a new fork in the road. They're coming to a new business model, and they're saying, how can we expand our business? Just like all the famous examples, Apple used to be a PC company, and now it's more of an iPhone company. Same thing with Shazam. I think that's what they're trying to pivot to. And so their Shazam for TV service, which they've been doing for a while, the new innovation is sort of, okay, suddenly they've created the technology where if you point your Shazam app to your television, all of a sudden, all the stuff about whatever show you're watching pops up on your app. And that has a lot of implications. I mean, one thing, it's cool, and it's also somewhat practical. The other thing is that, and I think even more importantly for their business model, is that they're starting to link in with advertisers for this. They have relationships with something like 140 brands. That's the number they keep using, Procter & Gamble and all these different giant companies. But if you really start to think about it, I mean, the example that the Shazam guy gave me when I interviewed him was sort of, okay, you're watching an insurance company ad on the web. Oh, I actually need car insurance. I'll Shazam that. Boom, I'm all of a sudden on my phone talking to the insurance rep.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty powerful thing, and it even speaks to something which is even more futuristic, which is the idea that the internet right now, and obviously always, has been separate. Your internet is on your computer and your phone and other devices, your iPad, whatever. The TV is the TV, but that may not last very much longer. They may converge. And one of the experts that I talked to for my piece suggested that Shazam was maybe a bridge to that future. It's trying to link those two things together, even though it will inevitably. That's maybe giving a little bit too much credit to Shazam, but still, I think it's a smart way of them for that company to expand its model.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I was going to make the same point. It feels a little bit like almost a stopgap technology, because TV is internet is becoming more into TVs now, and one day you'll be able to pull up all the same information just from your remote control. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's just a question of whether you want the information on your main screen or whether you want it on your second screen, and that's where Shazam probably has a future as a company, either integrating into set-top boxes and TVs, or actually just being a second screen application. Duncan, any thoughts?
I think mainly the key thing here, I very much agree with what Steve said, that the key thing here is that Shazam it links media with metadata, and that's what people want from it, and that's what it does expertly. And it's pretty much run out of extra places to go there with music, and TV is an obvious place. But it's very clever what it does. I think they've got a fantastic technology that seems to work very, very well, and it's something that people will definitely want to do for the time being. I mean, it's basically a good QR code. QR codes are mostly useless, but without having to scan a little black and white thing, suddenly you're getting excellent information about this TV show that you're watching. Yeah. It's really great technology.
And it's
for
actually,
a while.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Just one quick interesting point, I think. For a while, we at Rolling Stone were getting some of the Shazam charts and data. We're not getting it anymore. I'm not sure where that's going, but it was just interesting. That nothing that you wouldn't expect. It's sort of like, okay, Flo Rida has the most Shazam hits, Shazam tags. No news there. But one thing that I noticed that I found was an interesting trend was that people use Shazam quite frequently to identify what song was playing in their TV show. They'd watch Breaking Bad and they'd hear that Mickey Dolenz Monkeys song, and they'd go, "What the hell is that song?" Yeah. And those things tend to surge on the Shazam charts. And so that means people are really already kind of integrating the Shazam app with their television. And that suggests to me that it's a natural, perhaps, extension of their business.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I wouldn't be surprised if that's exactly why they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so now just a quick break. We're going to have Ashley Eldson from Palmsounds talk a little bit about his world of mobile music making apps.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of Palmsounds at Digital Music Trends. Well, it's been a pretty big week for mobile music. Apple have launched the iPhone 5, which is good in some ways for mobile music because it has a faster chip. Aside from that, personally I don't think it's that innovative, but it's a move in the right direction, so I'm guessing that lots of people will move up. Personally, I'm one of them. There we go. The really big news though this week is that Apple have approved an application called Audiobus. Now, Audiobus isn't just any old application. It solves a really big problem for iOS musicians. Now, one of the problems with iOS music is all of the apps run in little things called sandboxes. And sandboxes don't allow apps to talk to each other particularly. Now, one way of getting around that is through the use of something called virtual MIDI. And virtual MIDI allows one app to talk to another app using MIDI on the same device. Now this is great for things like sequencers and synths and drum machines, but what it doesn't let you do is to record the output. That's where Audiobus comes in. Audiobus allows you to record the output from one application into another in real time. This is going to be a huge step forward for mobile music making and a huge step forward for iOS musicians. So check out audiobus.com, have a look, find out what they're doing. It's going to be huge, and lots of application developers have already signed up to use their API and integrate Audiobus into their applications. So this is going to be a big step forward. Okay, to finish off today, I'm going to show you a fantastic app that I mentioned last week called Impactor, and more importantly, I'm going to show you how bad my finger drumming skills are. Here we go.
Okay, so let's pick back up talking about iTunes and their announcement and Apple's announcement last week. I think one of the first things I wanted to talk about really quickly is the fact that they didn't announce an iRadio, which was one of the big rumors of last week before the announcement. It was something that people were expecting Apple to finally launch. And it actually had caused Pandora's stock to drop significantly in the hours before the announcement, and then picked back up after it was revealed that it hadn't been released. So do you think it's something that's coming? Do you think Apple wants to get into this space, and how are they gonna do it?
Is this pretty much the oldest digital music rumor there is, that iTunes is going to launch a streaming service? I mean, it doesn't seem to go away.
No.
Other than Beatles coming to iTunes, and that eventually happened. But it's just this pops up every time there's an iPhone announcement, and there's been time pretty much since the first of those rumors was reported for Apple to go away, do all the negotiations and everything, and then come back with something like this. But to be honest, I think it's quite happy with its match service for the time being. I don't see it it necessarily being that fussed about competing in that market just yet. In the same way that Apple doesn't seem to be that first, and Microsoft doesn't seem to be that first. None of the big media giants seem to be that fussed about streaming yet.
Yeah.
And while I think that's probably a mistake, I think one of them should get on this pretty soon if they don't want to be ruled by Spotify in the coming years. I can see why they're not that bothered about it. We were talking a little bit earlier about how the average person just really isn't into streaming yet, and probably doesn't understand it, and is possibly a little bit resistant to it because they've built up big media collections already. So I can see why they're not doing it yet. I'm sure it's something they've talked about internally, but maybe its time hasn't yet come.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense for Apple to launch a streaming service at the moment because iTunes is still so dominant in digital music. They're not going to do anything to kind of reduce that. They're not going to try. If they've got, say, like 70% of the digital music market or more in the UK, there's no sense in trying to move those people over to something else when you already got something that's successful. If iTunes as a download store started to take off and not be successful, then I can certainly see them moving into that and trying to compete.
And just to expand on that, I totally agree with Andy, and Duncan too. But I think you have to look at whether financially a streaming service makes sense for Apple and just in general. I've seen the numbers on Spotify, and certainly, the technology is changing. Everybody has mobile devices, and they didn't 10 years ago. But I think the history of the Rhapsody company is somewhat instructive on this. This is a great company. They have a great product and a great service, but never has graduated beyond niche. Spotify, too, has done better. And certainly in Europe, it's done better, and their model is a little bit more effective, perhaps. But when you look at the total number of people who are paying those $5, $10 a month mobile subscription packages, is that enough to be sort of booming in the way that iTunes Music Store was booming? I kind of feel like if I'm Apple, it sort of makes sense not to go in that direction. Pandora is also a very successful service, but really, when you look at the types of fees, even after the ones they negotiated just recently with in the U.S., is Pandora really making a lot of revenue, a lot of profit, a lot of money? Yeah. I'm not sure, and I kind of feel like Apple has the flexibility right now to say, we've already got iTunes. When the next big thing comes along and starts to make money, we'll buy it or we'll make our own. That's
and that's
the question.
Sorry.
The question that Apple is going to be asking itself internally is this going to sell more iPhones? And the answer right now is no.
Right. That's another good point. Exactly.
Yeah, and also Apple is not very well known for creating loss-leading parts of its company. Even iTunes, it doesn't make them much money because it's so expensive to operate, but it's probably not losing them money. And we all know that Spotify and Pandora are still companies that are losing money every year and are struggling to, as they expand, they're struggling to balance the new users and the free users with what they have to pay back to the record industry. So if Apple looks at those charts that were published last week and sees, something that they could lose money in, even if it's only like $50, $100, $200 million that they can easily lose without any problems, they probably don't want to get into that.
And if you or I read a report about iPandora, just picking up on what Duncan said, does that mean we're going to go out and buy the iPhone to be able to use iPandora? I don't think so. Probably not. Maybe someday, and then they'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. And do you like the redesign of iTunes? Have you seen the screenshots?
Seen the screenshots. It looks nice. I'll reserve judgment until I've actually seen it. But it's certainly due a redesign.
Yeah.
And that move is very welcome, I think.
It's nice that they put music back into the focus, though, because it was getting really cluttered.
Yeah, considering it's called iTunes, yeah, absolutely. The iTunes has been in need of a massive simplification for a long time. What I'm not sure about yet is whether kind of syncing your devices and stuff is still part of it, because that's one legacy thing that Apple's got that seems a bit weird from a design standpoint. Why syncing and backing up my iPhone I have to do in their music shop? It's a bit confusing, but I think at some point they knew that they had to simplify iTunes, and the fact that they've done that is an excellent thing. It's a good step.
The only thing I would add to that is that I think, and this is a little bit peripheral, but I think that it's interesting to me that they finally abandoned Ping. I know that's sort of like or whatever. So it's not like Ping was ever successful, but it is interesting to me that, again, with me as the only example, and I'm a unique case, as the rest of you are, I'm sure. I mean, the Spotify Facebook integration has really changed the way I listen to music. You know, when I know that all my friends on Facebook can see whatever song I'm listening to, and there's a whole social media thing built around music, which is what Napster, the original Napster, was getting at, which is a very powerful thing. That's interesting to me and speaks to, I think, something that could be significant in the future. And I find it interesting that Apple tried to do that. They had the right instinct, but completely abandoned ship and did it poorly, which is not a typical Apple example. I mean, there are examples of that in Apple's history, but they're rare. And so I find that interesting that they just sort of let someone else do it instead. Yeah,
I'm terrified that they're going to decide to disincorporate the iTunes side and the music side from the apps side, because if I can judge it by how poor the podcasting app that they released is, which is completely unusable, then I don't know what they're going to do if they decide to actually separate music and apps and the way the phone is synced.
What's your favorite podcasting app?
I use Downcast, which is $1.99, but it works really well and it's reliable. So. And I've actually, the podcast is now available on Stitcher, which is a free app, actually, I think. It's a radio aggregator. Yeah, it's a radio aggregator, and it was actually surprising. A lot of people use it because after 3 days that I got the show on there, I got over 100 streams from the app, which was kind of weird because I never, I'd heard of it before, but I didn't think it'd be so much in use. But that's cool. Great stuff. More listens, I'm happy. Okay, I wanted to sort of close by talking about two companies that... Oh, actually, had one little things to join onto the conversation we had earlier about music and video coming together. We were talking about Shazam and the fact that they're expanding into the set-top box and the sort of second screen environment to offer an experience to users on the video front and make them expand into that huge field that is available for them to take, because there's not much out there otherwise. And another company that announced that there was some sort of merging between the audio and the video side was Audio this week, because it was made known that basically some of the staff that works on audio is actually going to be working as well on the video project, which is a stealth project still, but it's happening. It's there. It's not launched yet, but it's I guess it's going to be something like a Netflix competitor. I really don't know what it's going to be like. But Robert Andrews did a really great article on paid content on that. I think he was the first one to break the kind of news, and it's interesting to see a company deciding to share resources in two different fields of this kind. So, do you think it's an interesting development for audio?
It's still very mysterious for the time being. Nobody quite knows exactly what this is and how it's going to work and all that. But the guys behind it, Zenstrom and Fries, have both tried to do this sort of thing in the past. They had a pretty abortive attempt at a TV service a few years back called Juiced, which never really went anywhere. And the reason for that is just because the licensing wasn't ready for it. And it still feels to me like the licensing isn't quite ready for services like this. So if they're smart, they'll just keep video ticking over in the background until the TV market is ready to embrace this properly in the way that the music industry has managed to finally do with Spotify.
Yeah. Andy?
I think, I have nothing really to add. I really like audio as a service. I think they could do something good with a video service too. There's no reason why they couldn't. Whether they can compete is another matter. I mean, like I say, I really like audio, but at the same time, Spotify is so dominant, and it is where everyone shares music. And at the moment, it's kind of I still find myself dragged back to Spotify, even though I have accounts of both.
Absolutely.
But I'd certainly be interested to see what they do with video.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a huge company there already, like Netflix and Apple is looking to move into this field. It just feels like for a startup that has to get funding for a venture of this kind and doesn't have unlimited amounts of money to throw at content owners, it's going to be really hard to actually get the deals done. Steve, you're in the States, and audio is probably much better known in the US than in Europe at this point. Still, do you think that it's probably like a way to go to try and have two services that offer similar things, but on the audio and the video spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add on that. I guess the only thing I would say is that, a lot of the most successful companies that are distributing music digitally or video digitally are not really doing it with new content. And so I'm always a little bit dubious, especially, Netflix is kind of trying it. Maybe their model is more natural. I'm a little confused about what Rdio's video thing is going to do. Is it going to focus mostly on new content, or will it focus on just sort of distributing the video? I guess I'd have to read more about it, but I guess I feel like content is a little bit of a dead end financially, so I'm a little dubious of that. And I also feel like if it's just distribution of video, Rdio is a good service and it has some advantages, but I mean, really the $1 million gorilla in the room with digital video is YouTube. You're not really going to, unless you have an amazing model that takes away YouTube the way Facebook took away MySpace, which I don't see this being. I'm a little dubious of it. It seems like a small thing, and it may, be successful in a small way, possibly.
Yeah. All right. So last story that I want to cover was Reverbnation. So their latest move is to provide a new service that would basically allow artists to place targeted adverts in music sites. So that's quite an interesting take, because the advertising, even AdWords on Google can be fairly daunting for a musician. It can be fairly daunting to really fine-tune it in order to get the adverts that you want to get on the right platforms. But this promoted service would actually allow them to target the advertising specifically to stuff like MTV, Pitchfork, Billboard, YouTube, Pandora, and more services. So do you think this is an interesting move and could be really... I think it could be really useful for some musicians that are struggling with organizing their time, their advertising campaigns, and actually maybe spend a little bit more money, but actually get the content where they need to get it?
Definitely. I think this is a very solid move. Music fans have always been immensely tribal, and the kind of people that read Pitchfork are much less likely to read MTV, for example, and vice versa. So being able to, for bands that have fans in that area, to target their advertising to those fans specifically is a really powerful thing.
Yeah. Steve, you work for Rolling Stone quite a bit. Do you see really an opportunity there to be able to introduce premium advertising for bands that can actually address it to Rolling Stone, the website, and promote themselves there?
Yeah, I think it can be a very effective tool. Like Duncan said, the more the better. And it kind of a little bit reminds me of the traditional radio model. Like if you're a band, radio is going to play your music. That's not really something you pay for directly. That's more sort of negotiating and payola and all these different things. It's not really associated with I'm going to pay for an ad to get on the air. Whereas but if you are a band and you can't get on the radio, you can bypass the whole thing and just buy an ad on the radio.
Yeah.
And that it's not kind of seen as credible, if you have a DJ picking your song because that DJ just loves it, then that's seen as more credible, and an ad is not, but it's still good exposure, and these things complement each other. And so it's just another tool for bands to use, it seems to me. You can use the free model in this clumsy metaphor that I'm making is sort of you can post your music on Facebook or on YouTube or do all this stuff for free.
Yeah.
Then the pay model is I'm going to take out a display ad on Pitchfork, and that will complement whatever coverage that Pitchfork has of my band. Yeah. Or maybe Pitchfork has a 0.0 review of my band, and I'll take out a display ad as the opposing case.
Absolutely.
So I think that there's a lot you could do with it, and I think it's just obviously just very much beginning, and I'll be interested to see where it goes. But it does seem powerful to me.
Yeah, and Andy, you on the CMU you have advertising, of course, as well. So it's interesting to hear your point of view as well. Would you like to be able to make money via the website, via advertising, but actually have adverts that are music based instead of having random stuff?
Yeah. Obviously, it looks much nicer on the site when it's advertising music and not, we get an advert for an undertaker in Devon quite often, which is a bit odd. But I think in terms of, it depends how it's used and what it's used for in terms of its benefit for the artist. Like, obviously, if you're treating it as exposure, then it kind of depends on, is it giving the band exposure and directly translating into revenue, either via the advertising itself or via people going and buying your music because of that. And I don't know, it's a big, obviously there's a lot of debate about the kind of the decline of print media versus online, and how online advertising isn't bringing in the revenues to kind of replace the traditional models. And I don't know if like indie, like, if you're a really small artist and no one's heard of you, an advert isn't going to help you, because no one's going to look at an advert on Pitchfork and go, well, I've never heard of that band, I'm definitely going to click that advert. And so I think it's the kind of thing that remains to be seen, how it's used and how effective it is.
Yeah, I mean, the only downside I can see is the fact that consumers could be a little bit confused as to what's, because it's music-based advertising. Of course, it depends on how they are displayed on the website, but there could be a little bit of confusion as to what is the content of the website in terms of bands that the site is actually covering, and whether the advert looks very similar to something that the site might actually display as an article or as a feature on an artist. Do you think
that's more of a problem for the website itself, really, and its credibility, I guess.
But also, this, again, we don't know where this is going, but it's an interesting tool for artists, because certainly publications have their biases. Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, MTV, all these people have their biases. So Pitchfork maybe isn't going to cover X or Y band because they're not cool enough. But maybe X or Y band thinks, if only the Pitchfork audience had a little bit of exposure to me, they would see that I'm very cool. Then they could work it that way. And that goes back to my radio analogy. It's sort of like, okay, such and such radio station won't play this band because they don't fit the format or whatever stupid reason they have. I'm going to put an ad on. I sound like Peter Gabriel, and I'm going to make sure that the station that plays the Peter Gabriel song has my ad. Let the people decide. It's effective. It can be effective.
Yeah, I can't wait for Limp Bizkit to start advertising on Pitchfork.
Yes, Journey was the name that I thought of.
You would take screenshots of that and just post them everywhere, really. Okay, that's great. Well, I think it's a wrap, and I just wanted to do the rounds with you guys and talk about anything that you want to talk about in terms of whether you have any project that you're working on that you'd like to promote, or whether there's anything in terms of music or books or anything that you'd like to recommend to our listeners. Stephen?
Well, one news trend, a couple things I wanted to ask. One news trend that I think that people should follow, it's not digital, but AEG in the States is for sale. I don't know if you read those reports.
Yeah.
But that is going to be very much worth watching for people who are interested in music. Right now, it's kind of playing out on the web or in major publications as a sports story because of their ties to sports teams in Los Angeles, and AEG also owns the Staples Center. So that's, but if you're a music fan, AEG is the #1 competitor to the world's largest concert promoter, Live Nation. And whoever picks up AEG, assuming the concert unit gets sold, that's going to be a big, big story going forward and will affect a wide range of musicians and music fans. And then the only other thing I wanted to say, just sort of personally, is that I just read a great book. It came out earlier this year, the James Brown biography by R.J. Smith called The One. Great, great book. Really well done. Starts out with an old slave rebellion in South Carolina in the early 1800s, and somehow RJ manages to sort of weave that into James Brown's mix of rebellion and rhythm, and how he started out in that exact same geography. And it's just the whole beginning of the book, I just could not take my eyes off it, and it carried that momentum all the way through. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Duncan?
One thing that popped up on the internet this week that really interested me is a thing called the Cultural Commons Collecting Society, which is an initiative based in Europe of starting up a new collecting society, a pan-European collecting society that has that has been founded with technology in mind, essentially. So rather than combating technological progress in a way that some collecting societies across Europe particularly are, they're integrating this stuff. They're integrating things like Creative Commons and stuff like that, and they're trying to set up a couple of meetings as to exactly how this should be set up. But if that sounds kind of interesting to you, if you're a musician in Europe, then you should go and have a look at it. C3s.cc, I think, is their website. C3s.cc, and you can kind of sign a declaration of intent that you're interested in being a part of it, or you can just go and find out more. And other than that, no, nothing else. Nothing else really. I wanted to share. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to.
Great. Yeah, I'll put the handles at the end of the show in the credits. So cool. Andy?
I think, yeah, actually, as Steve said, the AEG story is going to be really, really interesting as that kind of develops, because it's a huge company, and there's talk of them selling it as a whole unit rather than splitting it up. So, I mean, whoever gets that, it'll be an incredibly interesting story. And then obviously the other big acquisition story at the moment is Universal buying EMI.
Of course, yeah.
Obviously been going on for a long, long time now, but I think one of the interesting kind of almost side effects of that is that in Europe, certainly, it looks like Universal are going to have to sell off a lot of EMI catalogues in order to get the deal approved, which may have happened by the time this podcast comes out. But the big kind of expectation at the moment is that BMG are likely to buy a lot of those catalogues, or as many, as much as they can. BMG obviously been acquiring a lot of stuff over the last year or so, and it'd be really interesting to see if BMG actually becomes a major label again, and kind of merged with Sony, split off again, and then just started from scratch and just bought a lot of stuff, and that will be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've been wanting to cover that story for the last couple of weeks, but it's just now it's such a high level discussion on what's happening, and there's actually not that much information really available in the last couple of weeks. All the conversations, especially for the important parts, which are Europe and the US, are going on under wraps, so there's not really much to talk about quite yet, but I think it's going to be really interesting in the next couple of months to see the impact that's going to have on the digital divisions and how these companies are going to be able to move assets around and merge in a way that is effective for artists and for the people that are already working there. So
yeah, it's going to be. EMI obviously launched a lot of digital stuff in the last year, and it'd be interesting to see what happens to all of that once the deal goes through.
Absolutely.
I'm still waiting for the EMI catalog sales to get cheap enough for some individuals to buy them. Like, I want to own some obscure capital art, like Adam Ant or something. I just want to own some catalog. So I keep waiting. All these machinations that EMI's gone through over the last few years are people bidding on them, and now that Universal has to divest some of these catalogs, blah blah blah. I'm hopeful again.
An eBay sale.
I hope even perhaps some of the artists might be able to buy them back. That might be interesting to see.
Okay, well, that's another possibility as well.
Yeah, that would be absolutely.
There are.
All right, and if you want to download those reports that we talked about at the beginning of the show, you can head to musictank.co.uk and musicmetric.com, and you should find links on there to download the reports, which is kind of they might have their flaws and they're kind of, but they're definitely worth having a look at and thinking about with some new information on there. Cool. Great. Thanks for being on the show, and thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.